In a world where humanity teeters on the edge of extinction, betrayal runs deeper than blood. Join us as we unravel the chilling tale of a fallen hero fighting an unstoppable evil. Long ago, humans and vampires were mortal enemies, their relationship marked by unending hostility. Armed with swords and shields, humans often faced vampires, who were stronger and more agile, as nothing more than helpless lambs awaiting slaughter. Fortunately, when God created this world, He granted sunlight to humanity. By night, people fought off the monster's invasion, and by day, they developed cannons and armor. After hundreds of years, the tide slowly began to turn. However, the vampire threat extended beyond mere physical battles. The fiercer the human resistance, the more ruthless the vampire's retaliation became. This war between the two species continued, wreaking devastation until it nearly destroyed the entire human world. On the brink of extinction, humanity retreated behind fortified walls, seeking protection from the church. Out of this desperate need, a unique type of human was born, one forged through a blend of science and theology, the demon-hunting clerics. The church trained these clerics in vampire-killing techniques, while the military provided them with cutting-edge equipment and technology. Thanks to their efforts, humanity eventually gained the upper hand, pushing vampires to the brink of extinction. Those who survived were captured and classified as protected species. As time passed, however, people began to fear the power of the demon-hunting clerics themselves. The church leadership ordered their disbandment, and these former heroes faded back into a society that no longer needed them. Over time, both the demon-hunting clerics and the vampires became mere stories and legends. With the war over, people busied themselves with reclaiming land, and William was among these pioneers. The land's radiation levels had almost dropped to zero, and soon, crops could be planted once more. William's work was progressing smoothly, but his family life was far less harmonious. The relocation to this barren land made work easier for him, but his teenage daughter constantly complained about their new life in the wilderness. After a heated argument over dinner, an unusual rumble shook the ground. Looking out the window, William saw a horde of pale creatures charging toward the house. His wife quickly hid their daughter in the underground shelter, urging her not to come out no matter what happened. William took up the wall-mounted cannon to defend his home, but as the cross fell to the ground, his and his wife's screams echoed through the house. The shelter door opened, and a man with a rounded hat cast his shadow over the daughter. In the Bishop City, where industrial smog forever blocked out the sun, this figure was a priest, the once feared, now wandering demon-hunting cleric. After the war, the church had risen to become the world's dominant power. Defying the church was equivalent to defying God. Daily life had been reduced to mechanical labor and constant prayer in confessional machines that stood everywhere. The priests displayed on these screens did not truly listen. The synthetic images repeated only a few programmed phrases, ensuring that the confessions flowed efficiently. The guilt of leading his comrades into the lair of ancient horrors haunted the priest, a burden that he had yet to cast off. Now, forced to seek solace from a cold, unfeeling screen, he found it hard not to feel disillusioned as a forsaken outcast of the church. On his way home, the townsfolk dared not speak to him or any other former demon-hunting clerics. It wasn't respect, it was a deep-seated fear. Just as he stared out the window at the towering cityscape, lost in thought, a man dressed like a cowboy walked in, the sheriff of the Borderlands, Hicks. It turned out that William had entrusted Hicks to find his brother, the demon-hunting priest. William's last request was for his brother to inform the church immediately in his role as a cleric. The vampires were back. The priest went to the Vatican and reported the Borderlands situation to the elders, but the Pope merely found it amusing. "We eradicated the vampires long ago," he said, "and there's no record of any escapes from the protected zone." The Pope concluded that William's family had likely been attacked by bandits, and ordered the local police to handle it. He reminded the priest that demon-hunting clerics were church property, and strictly forbidden from leaving the city without permission. The Pope even warned him against avenging William on his own. At a bar in the city, a high-ranking church official with a friendly rapport approached the priest. "It's not about whether vampires exist or not," he cautioned, "but rather that the church is questioning your loyalty." He urged the priest not to clash with the Vatican. Each word filled the priest with sorrow. During the war, the clerics had turned the tide in favor of the church. Now, in peacetime, they were discarded, denied freedom, and separated from their loved ones. Once saviors in the name of God, they were now seen by the church as nothing more than disposable tools. Suddenly, guards burst through the doors, ready to arrest the priest. Shocked at this betrayal by an old friend, he clenched his rosary until it snapped. Returning to his quarters, he retrieved his old silver dagger and opened the warehouse's back door. Before him sat a motorcycle, modified with an airplane engine. The priest rode from day into night, and from night into day, tearing across the endless desert, until he finally arrived at the borderlands where William had lived. While searching through supplies for clues, Sheriff Hicks, who had first brought him William's message, appeared. Together they headed toward the center of the borderlands town. Compared to the main diocese, this area was primitive. No skyscrapers, no communication technology, more like a frontier town from the Old West. News of William's family being attacked by vampires had already spread, drawing swindlers looking to exploit the terrified townsfolk. In a lawless place like this, the sheriff dealt with these con artists directly, using methods that were as swift as they were effective. At the town's clinic, the priest's brother, William, finally regained consciousness. As soon as he saw the priest, he told him that his daughter had been taken by vampires. Then, in a moment of weakness, William confessed a long-held guilt. William's wife had once been the priest's wife. Before he became a demon-hunting cleric, the priest had entrusted his wife to William's care, hoping that the war would end quickly so he could return and resume his life with her. But the war dragged on, and eventually William and she grew close and married. William, now at death's door, begged the priest to rescue his daughter. With that, he passed away. The next day, the priest buried William and his wife, setting off on a journey of vengeance and rescue for his niece. Back at his brother's home, he and Sheriff Hicks tracked the vampire's trail and quickly deduced that their destination was the vampire reserve. Vampires have two main ways of dealing with humans. They can either kill them directly or share their blood with them, the latter usually with the human's consent. Those who receive vampire blood don't become full vampires. Instead, they turn into creatures known as ghouls, half-human, half-demon monstrosities. During the war, vampires avoided sunlight and hid in ancient nests during the day. Many refugees from border areas who received no protection from the church joined the vampire ranks, becoming ghouls. Unlike vampires, ghouls were not afraid of sunlight. So while the vampires rested in their nests, these ghouls gathered intelligence on humans, ensuring that vampire attacks were calculated and precise. After the war, the surviving vampires were confined to Reserve 98, where they were now treated as a protected species and called night shadows. They could no longer drink human blood and had to rely on animal blood for sustenance. The dirty job of feeding them fell to the ghouls, who maintained the reserve. As a result, security at Reserve 98 was sparse. Knowing they'd get no straight answers from these mutated creatures, the priest and sheriff stopped wasting time and pushed open the metal hatch leading underground. The environment was dismal, and a few remaining guards lay dead in the corridors. Some cell doors had been forcibly opened. They found one ghoul, and the priest began interrogating him about his niece's whereabouts. But as they spoke, more ghouls armed with weapons appeared from deeper within the passage. Losh. The priest left one of the ghouls alive, demanding to know their plans. No, they once ruled this land. They were warriors. Then, noticing the sun sinking low on the horizon, he realized what this meant. Night was approaching, and the vampires would soon emerge. One by one, metal coffins below ground opened, and in a flash, shadowy figures began streaming out of the passage. Vampires filled the air, preparing to strike. Unhurried, the priest took out his Bible and began to recite exorcism prayers. The last vampire, sensing defeat, let out a few shrill cries before retreating. The priest returned to the subdued ghoul, who, impressed by the priest's power, revealed his niece's location. However, as soon as the ghoul mentioned the west, the priest lunged at the fleeing vampire, the struggle taking them into the deeper recesses of the underground chambers. It was becoming clear that these creatures were plotting something far more sinister. Based on the ghoul's directions, the priest and Sheriff Hicks checked the map and identified the west as the location of the ancient nest. They drove through the ruins of war, stopping on a high ridge to prepare. The journey had solidified their mutual trust, and as they discussed William's daughter, Hicks openly declared his intention to marry her, vowing to rescue her, even at the risk of his own life. But the priest warned him with a grave tone. If Hicks were to be turned into a ghoul, it would be a very different fate. They continued driving until they finally spotted the old nest. Grabbing onto bones for footholds, they climbed to the entrance of one of the caves. The structure inside was like a dense, circular honeycomb, ominous and dark. Though there were no vampires in sight, The priest remained wary. He remembered leading a group of demon-hunting clerics here in the past. A single lapse in caution had resulted in one comrade being dragged away by a hidden vampire. The priest dropped a flare into the bottom of the nest, then leapt down alone, leaving Hicks outside. The maze of tunnels was complex, twisting endlessly like an eternal labyrinth. Trusting his instincts, he continued deeper. Suddenly, a dark figure flashed through one of the passages, and the priest charged, knife at the ready. But it wasn't a vampire. It was a former ally, a female cleric with whom he had once fought side by side. From the day the priest had fled the bishop's city, the church had ordered his execution. Regular guards were no match for him, so the church had dispatched 4 of his former comrades, now demon hunters, to track him down. This female cleric had separated from the group, hoping to warn him of their mission, but just as they spoke, gunshots echoed from Hicks's direction. They rushed over to find that vampires were indeed lurking within the nest. The priest gathered all his strength. He clasped his hands together, took a deep breath. The cave had been abandoned for years. Why would vampires still be guarding it? The 3 of them continued searching, uncovering a disturbing detail. One of the tunnels appeared freshly dug. Following it, they stumbled upon a newly constructed nest. As they passed through this new nest, the priest sensed a change in the air currents. A few steps further, a massive opening loomed before them. The opening pointed toward Jericho District, where the other 3 demon-hunting clerics had been dispatched. Meanwhile, in Jericho, an unregistered black train sped into the station, under the watchful eye of a surprised night guard. A vampire leapt out of the train car, followed by a mysterious man in a black bowler hat. The man, as if giving orders, unleashed an entire legion of vampires into the city. The 3 demon hunters in Jericho quickly positioned themselves, launching a swift and brutal assault on the man in the black hat. At dawn, the priest and his 2 companions arrived in Jericho District, only to find that the vampires had already retreated. The night's blitz attack had left no survivors in the town. As they walked further into the city center, they witnessed a horrific scene. The 3 demon hunters who had come to protect the town were brutally killed and bound to crosses. The sight was a twisted display of cruelty. Jericho had no nearby nests or night shadow preserve areas, so how had the vampires arrived and left so quickly? The priest quickly realized the answer lay with the railway, the only feasible way to bring in vampires en masse, and that railway led straight to the bishop's city, where sunlight never penetrated. If the vampires truly planned to invade the city by train, the consequences would be disastrous. The priest realized he had been drawn into a trap. Whoever orchestrated this knew him well. They knew that kidnapping his niece would drive him to leave the bishop's city. They also understood church policy. Demon hunters belonged to the church, and any disobedience was punishable by death. By sending other demon hunters to hunt him down, the city would be left vulnerable to vampire attack. This mastermind intended to lure the priest and his fellow demon hunters far from the city with false leads, giving the vampire army ample time to overrun it. A chill ran down the priest's spine as he grasped the full scope of the plan. Fortunately, they had reached Jericho District in time. If they could catch up to the train, they might still prevent the impending massacre. The priest lowered the fallen demon hunters from their crucifixes and burned their bodies in a respectful farewell. The 3 then set off at top speed across the desert, racing through rocky terrain, until they finally spotted a thick plume of smoke from the troop train, hurtling towards the bishop's city. The priest instructed the female cleric to set explosives on the tracks ahead. He sped toward the train's middle section, while Hicks jumped in from the rear. A ghoul spotted the female cleric planting explosives, and immediately ordered a few others to chase her down on motorcycles. Hicks managed to pry open a train car door, revealing rows of vampires in a deep trance-like sleep. The priest climbed to the top of the train, where the man in the black hat awaited him. To the priest's shock, this man was not only someone who knew him well, he was a former ally. Years ago, when the priest led a team into the vampire nest, one of his men had been taken. This man, now in the black hat, had been turned by the vampire queen, who granted him a second life as a super ghoul, a being superior to both demon hunters and vampires. Now he was bent on aiding the vampire queen in destroying the church and reclaiming the land. Meanwhile, the female cleric finished setting the explosives on the tracks and mounted her bike to rendezvous with the priest and Hicks, but the ghouls pursuing her had nearly closed in. The priest found himself outmatched as his former comrade dodged his every move. Joy. A powerful punch from the black-hatted ghoul sent the priest tumbling off the train car, where he barely managed to grab onto the railing beneath. Hicks, fighting his way through the carriages, fired at an attacking vampire from above, only to find himself surrounded by a swarm of vampire spawn. After fending off the first wave, the priest and Hicks pushed forward, arriving at the final car. In the ensuing chaos, Lucy managed to break free, grabbing a kerosene lantern and hurling it at her captor. It was then that the priest saw her face clearly. Lucy was not just his niece, she was his own daughter. The man in the black hat struck Lucy, sending her sprawling across the carriage, then pinned the priest against the wall. The brutal force drove nails into his shoulders, and the searing pain caused him to lose consciousness. The black-hatted figure intended for the priest to burn alive, setting a slow, merciless fire before leaping out of the train with Lucy. Realizing that merely derailing the train at its current speed wouldn't prevent it from crashing into the bishop's city, the female cleric decided to make a final, desperate move. As the priest came to, he reached for the silver cross the cleric had entrusted to him, the only weapon left that could kill vampires. Time was running out. Less than a minute remained before the train would plow into the city. Meanwhile, the black-hatted figure was about to transform Lucy, sinking his fangs toward her neck. The black-hatted vampire moved toward them, intent on killing them both. As the smoke cleared, the battered cleric emerged from the wreckage, miraculously alive. They had averted the disaster by a hair's breadth, sparing the city, which remained blissfully unaware of the calamity it had narrowly escaped. The priest, carrying a sack, strode into the prayer hall, interrupting the cardinal's solemn prayers. In front of the startled assembly, he pulled a freshly severed vampire's head from the bag and threw it at the Pope's feet. This is just the beginning. Darkness still looms, and humanity's survival hangs by a thread. Subscribe to Movies Bag and uncover the stories that keep you on the edge of your seat.